I am Cleo Mullins. I'm an art conservator in Richmond, Virginia, and we are here in the Hoffbauer Gallery at the Virginia Historical Society. We are in the process of conserving the murals, which have not been touched in the last 50 years. They were painted by Charles Hoffbauer, he was a French artist who came just before the First World War and left to go fight for France in 1918, but came back after the war to finish the murals, at which point he scraped them off the wall because he had a completely different perspective on war after that, and finished them within about a year after coming back. In the beginning, the heating system was a hand-fueled coal furnace, and it blackened the murals. And in addition, there were problems with the roof, and had water leaking down the walls. So Hoffbauer had to come back in 1937 to restore his own murals because they were flaking and blackened. After that, they were restored by a German restorer in the late 1940s. And finally, in 1962, they were restored by a local artist, Helen Bailey. When we treat these paintings, we have the benefit of the experience of conservation scientists and all the conservators that have gone before, and the materials that they have tried and used, and the ones that have stood the test of time, and the techniques that have stood the test of time. And so one of the goals of conservation is certainly to do no harm, but to also have what you do be reversible without doing harm to the work of art. So when we work, we're going to work with synthetic resin varnishes that have a very long period when they stay clear and when they can be removed with relatively mild solvents, solvents that will not harm the work of art. The first step was to photograph everything, because in current standards of art conservation, you record everything that the condition before treatment, during treatment, and after treatment. And you write reports and whatnot. So you keep everything so that the next generation knows what you did. So we've not only been doing that, but with the assistance of the Historical Society staff, we've been going back through old records and corresponding with other archives to find out what was done before. The first stage after photography is consolidation. If you look around the room, you will see a number of patches of white on the wall. And that is Japanese wet strength tissue, and we glued it to the wall temporarily, pasted it to the wall, and that holds the loose paint, the flaking paint, in place. Then we inject it with these large horse needles with an adhesive, a heat-sensitive adhesive, and then with a small tacky iron, we slowly move the pieces back into place until they're reattached. When we get to those areas, we remove the facing. The next step is cleaning, which is ongoing right now. We are removing a very thick layer of varnish, which has accumulated a lot of dirt over the years. And then we are removing overpaint added during the previous restorations. And we were trying to get back as much as possible to the 1921 version. Now, Hoffbauer, when he came back to make repairs in 1937, did make some changes, and for the most part, where they seem like artist changes, where he really wanted to alter the image, we're leaving those. Where he restored his painting, we're trying to judge whether or not we can take that off, whether we want to take it off. And working with the curators, we're making those decisions as we get to them. The final stage will be applying a new varnish, filling the areas of loss with a kind of a spackle-like putty to bring it up to the level of the rest of the paint. And then we will in-paint the areas of damage. And by that I mean just covering up areas of damage. We don't, for instance, if there's a loss in the sky, we will just match the color to that particular loss. We won't repaint an area of the sky. And in fact, we'll try to do as little in painting as we can. During each stage, it will get photographed again, and it will be photographed finally. We started in June 2011, and it is now March 2012, and we anticipate working for another 2.5 years. This mural is summer, and it's Lee and his generals. They were never really together like this, but it's Hoffbauer wanted to include all of the major generals in the Civil War. We have been cleaning this. Yunjo Lee and Andre Phillips have been cleaning on this wall now for several months. This wall in particular is very, very dirty. It has many layers on it. So they have first removed the very, very thick layer of synthetic varnish that was applied in 1962. They have gone back over it and removed a first layer of grime and the remnants of what appears to be an earlier varnish that was not completely removed. And now they are in the final stages of getting that last layer of grime off. There was a layer of grime under the varnish as well as on top of it. And I think you can see the very clear demarcation between the cleaned area and the dark area. The patch beside, the little area beside Lee's head is the third stage in cleaning on this particular wall, and that's why that's lighter. We've done a series of test cleanings on different parts of the wall, and we started on the left and we went across, and we started again on the left and went all the way across. And now, I guess just because the scaffolding is there, it's easier to start from the right and move back this time. During the painting of the murals, Hoffbauer changed his mind about the composition over and over and over again. This mural was changed, sometimes completely scraping it down and moving figures around at least 14 to 15 times. And during the prior restorations, at some point, his final layer of paint was removed, exposing, I don't know if you can see it, the earlier version. This is the pants leg and shoe of a man. Just above it is a rifle. What we will do in the end is, after we've varnished it, we will then in-paint that area and try to make it as close to his version in 1921 as possible. This should not show. Whenever possible, we try to return the work of art to the artist's original intention, as much as we can do that. So in this case, we would choose to follow what we see on the 1921 photos and to reproduce that. The head of the seated officer is a good example of the results you get when you remove overpaint that has been applied by subsequent restorers. The face, when we first got here, was skewed to be a profile version rather than this quarter profile, which is the way that Hoffbauer intended to make it. We have a life sketch and the 1921 sepia photograph of the painting when it was finished that show the face being much more like this than like it was when we got here back in last June. On this wall, which is the right-hand panel of winter, you can see these big white patches, and those are our facings. We have glued paper to the surface of the wall on areas where the paint is flaking. The losses were then injected with a large horse needle with a synthetic adhesive, and then when the adhesive had thoroughly dried, we will heat it and slowly reattach all of the flaking paint. When we get to this wall to clean it, we'll remove the facing and then clean the wall. But the paint will be consolidated. If we didn't do that, we could lose paint while we're working. This is the left panel of winter, and it was probably the worst wall of all. This large faced area is again the piece of paper glued to the surface of the wall temporarily. The paint in this area was flaking like potato chips. And so we have glued the paper to the surface, injected the losses with adhesive, and then gone back with the small tacking iron and gradually heated the area until the pieces of paint were reattached to the wall. And when we get to this area to clean it, we'll, of course, remove the facing tissue and then begin removal of the varnish and grime. The other problem with this wall is this very, very major blister. There is a blister about this wide and beginning right at the bottom of this wheel and going right up underneath the shoulder and chin of those two men. And in this area, we believe that the whole canvas has completely detached from the wall. The way Hoffbauer would have done these is he would have coated the wall with a newsprint or tissue paper that was saturated in an adhesive, and then begun nailing the canvas at the top of the wall and gradually squeegeeing it against the wall, nailing another row of tacks, and then he would come down again and nail another row of tacks. On some of the walls, we can actually see where the paint is popped off from the top of the nails. This wall is autumn, and it had some of the worst damages, in particular the flaking. Charles Hoffbauer, the artist, writes to the Historical Society and talks about the amount of damage on this particular painting. The flaking at one point was so bad that Helen Bailey tells me that there were flakes of paint lying on top of the gun cases that used to be underneath of this, the exhibit cases. So we have faced, it has continued to flake, and we have faced this and consolidated it, and will eventually be removing the facing tissue and beginning to clean. In this area, we also have some overpaint to remove. So this particular area, this sort of wedge of hillside, is going to be one of the most time-consuming parts of the conservation treatment. Beth Fulton is up there cleaning varnish off and then the underlying grime. This is the third wall that we have been working on. The first wall we have cleaned. The second wall, which is summer, we have almost cleaned. We're still working on cleaning it. And then this is so we're on the third wall now.